Welcome again to the training. Today we're going to be talking about how to write up a contract to lease. For those of you who don't know, a contract to lease is the offer that is sent out when you are representing a tenant when we are working with rentals. So this is a transaction. This is a rental that I just worked, so I want to use this one as an example. Today's training is going to be more hands-on. And you guys can feel free to ask any questions. This is interactive as always. If you have any questions, if you want to unmute, if you want to use the chat, you can do that as well. Thank you guys for being here. I'm going to go ahead and start right away. I don't want to keep you guys here too long, but today I just want to focus on an example of what it would look like when you are working with a tenant and your tenant, you've showed them the property and they tell you, okay, I am ready to go. I want to send an offer to this property, or what do I have to do to apply? So what we need to send as agents is this contract to lease, which is essentially, I always tell the clients, it says it at the top right here, this is not a lease. Sometimes people, it hasn't happened to me that often, but sometimes some tenants might be like, oh, I'm already signing something right away. Is this going to be the actual lease? I explain to them, no, this is not the lease. This is just the offer that we're presenting to the landlord with all of the terms that are going to be outlined with what is going to actually be on the lease. But this is just the preliminary offer, not the actual contract, and it says it up here at the top. This is not a lease. A lease should be signed before occupancy. The lease agreement is actually a 20-something page document, whereas the contract to lease is only 3 pages, okay? Now, we set this document by going on Transaction Desk. On Transaction Desk is where you can find this document to fill out. And this is how you're going to fill it out. I have here an example of 205 Foxtail Drive, B2 in Green Acres, Florida 33415. So the first thing that we have to do when we're going to fill out a contract to lease is the portion where it says the prospective landlord. So how do we find out who the landlord for the property is? We want to make sure that we're sending a complete offer when we're sending the contract to lease. So if you happen to not know, if Transaction Desk doesn't automatically populate it or fill it in for you, then you can look up on here where it says IMAP tax info. I know some people have Matrix, some people have Beaches. There is a function on your MLS that allows you to go to the property appraiser website. So on Beaches MLS, this is what it looks like. On Matrix, it might look a little bit different, but essentially it's the same thing. You want to hit on either IMAP, property appraiser, whatever other name Matrix might have for it. And if you click on the property appraiser site, it essentially is showing you right here who the owner is of the property. It has all of the property information, the property address, the parcel ID number, what kind of property this is, and here is the current owner. So I usually just take this, I copy it, and then I paste it right into where it says prospective landlord, okay? Now, in the second line of paragraph number 1, there's the prospective tenant. That is where you're going to put your client's information. Normally, when you send an offer for a rental, you ask for their IDs, you ask for their proof of income, whether that be last 3 months bank statements, or whether that be last 4 to 5 pay stubs, whatever proof of income they have. When you receive their ID, you can see what their full name is. So I like to put my client's full legal name on the contract to lease so that when the landlord or listing agent is going to prepare the lease agreement, they know exactly what my client's name is and they can just go off of the contract to lease or just use their ID as well. So in this case, my client's name is Juan Antonio Leiva. Okay, so that is what I put on here. All right. And if we continue moving forward, this is where you put here in the second line or the third line, it says prospective landlord and prospective tenant agree to execute a lease agreement no later than, I give them usually 2 days. So in this case, you can put here a date that where you give them 1 or 2 days to give you a response on whether the landlord will move forward with your tenant or whether they will not. Okay, now if we continue moving forward here down in the same paragraph, there's a section that says the lease will include the terms set forth in paragraphs 3 to 12 of this contract to lease and other mutually agreeable terms. And here it gives you the option to choose who will be preparing the lease. Sorry, give me 1 second. About that. My phone was ringing and I didn't know how to turn it off from the computer. I apologize. Okay, so moving forward here, you can see, as I was saying, you have the option to choose whether the landlord or the tenant will be the one preparing the lease. In this case, always put the landlord. The landlord or the listing agent would be the one preparing the lease. Okay. Now, in paragraph 2, we move on, and there's the portion that says the deposit. So in the deposit section, you want to put, in this case, the rental amount is $19.50. Okay. So you will put here the deposit amount would be $19.50, would be a month's rent. Okay. Usually you can put here who the deposit holder will be. I like to use Lifestyle Title because it is our company's title company, and it's just more control for me. The deposit is there. That first month is what's going to be used as commissions, and I already know the girls at Lifestyle Title, and of course I encourage you guys to use them as well, just because that way you have a little bit more control as well of where your client's deposit is. So I usually like to put Lifestyle Title. New World, sometimes the listing agent might tell you my company's going to hold escrow, so then you would just need to put their title company or their company's name there. So it really depends on what the listing agent tells you. If the listing agent tells you my company will hold it, then their company will hold it. If they allow you, I usually always send my offer that Lifestyle Title will be holding it. And usually I don't get any pushback. So put Lifestyle Title, or you can put the other agent's company or their title company, or if you have some other method of holding escrow, that's fine. Sometimes the owner holds it. I'm not too keen, or I'm not too I don't really like to go that route, just because in the hands of the landlord, they could just take it and say bye, and you know what I mean? So usually it's always good to have an escrow company to hold title, to hold the escrow for the rental. Okay. In the property address, self-explanatory, you're going to put the address of the property, making sure that you don't miss out any of the unit numbers. Usually transaction desk, if you input the MLS number in transaction desk, it automatically populates it for you. So you don't have to worry about that. Then here, there are some rentals that are seasonal or that are come furnished, come unfurnished. So the contract to lease specifies the terms of the lease. So where it says here the property will be either unfurnished or furnished and attach inventory. If it's furnished, you want to attach an inventory list, or the listing agent can provide that to you. If it's unfurnished, like this case, then you would just check off that the property is coming unfurnished. Okay. And here in this section, right below that, it says the property will be used for only residential purposes and occupied by only tenant and the following persons. Usually on this section, you can put any minors if there are children. It's not absolutely mandatory, but it is something that you guys can get done. You guys can put the minors information on there. Or if there's anybody else that's not going to be on the actual lease, you guys can also do that as well. Okay, place those people's information on there. The fourth paragraph is lease term. And the lease term is usually a year. You are not allowed, as an agent, we are not allowed to go over a year. So you have to make sure that this term is exactly 1 year. So in this case, my client would like to move in January 1st. For it to be exactly 1 year, the end date has to be 12/31 of the same year. Okay. All right. If it was, let's say, December, if he was moving in today, December 23rd, 2024, his move out date would be December 22nd, 2025. It always has to be just 1 day before for it to be exactly that 1 year. If a tenant or a landlord wants to do more than a year, we need to get a lawyer involved. So usually you just want to take it and keep it at 1 year exactly. Okay. Paragraph number 5 is money due before occupancy. So this is going to be however much the landlord is charging. There are some rentals that charge only first and deposit. Majority of them do charge first, last, and security, right? So the tenant here will pay, paragraph 5, money due before occupancy, will pay a sum of, you want to put the total amount that is due, including first, last, and security. So in this case, $19.50, we multiply that by 3 months, and that's going to be $58.50. Okay, so you want to put the total amount that is going to be due. And on the bottom part, you see that it's broken down into what each money is and when they're going to be due. So the first month's rent is the $19.50, and I placed that would be due upon lease signing. 24 to 48 hours after the lease has been signed and executed, I want to have my tenant send the deposit to make sure, sending it to Lifestyle Title. We provide an escrow letter to show the listing agent, hey, we have the deposit, we're good to go. Okay. Then the other 2 months that are going to be due at move-in, which is the last month's rent and the security deposit, I placed it down here in its respective location, last month's rent plus applicable taxes, security deposit, And those would be due at final walkthrough or the day of move-in. That's what, or you can either put a date at here. I just like to put at final walkthrough, because sometimes the dates change. So something might happen. The HOA might get delayed with approving the client, whatever might happen. So I just like to put upon lease signing and at final walkthrough. Everybody does it a little bit different. You can put an exact date on there. That's not a problem. So I do want to point out that there are some additional lines in this section of the breakdown. For example, there are some associations if you're working at a property or at a rental that has an association. There are some associations that require an additional deposit from the tenant. So I have seen it that sometimes I do negotiate that, because it is a lot of money for tenants, right? They're charging first, last security, and on top of that, sometimes it's a month deposit for the HOA. Sometimes it's just $1,000. Sometimes it's just $500. It depends. It varies by association, but this is something to keep an eye out for, because you don't want to tell your client, hey, this is only 3 months, first, last, and security. And then you find out that on the MLS in small print here in the broker remarks, it says this HOA has a $500 or $1,000 association deposit. And now your client has to put in another $1,000, and you didn't tell them that before they signed a lease. So you really want to make sure that you keep an eye out for this when you're sending the contract to lease. Ask. Sometimes if they're a good listing agent, they have in the document section, they have a list of the documents for that association. So you can check the HOA application. This one just so happens to have it. So I can check what the requirements for the HOA application are. So I know that my client needs to have a 680 credit score. So if I know as an agent that if my client doesn't have that, I'm not even going to apply. I'm not even going to have them apply to this, right? All of the information that is needed, the $250 application fee. Hey, just a heads up, Mr. Tenant, this application is going to require $250 fee. Make sure that you let them know this, because you don't want them to feel that this is a surprise. You want to make sure you let them know of all the expenses that are involved, and that way you're able to develop that rapport and that trust with your client. There is also a section here for a pet deposit. That pet deposit fee, you will have to ask. Sometimes the listing agent will let you know whether it's refundable or non-refundable. There are some rentals that give you the refund as long as the pet didn't cause any damage. And then there are majority of the rentals, at least that I've worked with, they're non-refundable, where they just collect a fee. It's usually $150 to $250. Sometimes I've seen even $500, depending on the size of the animal, or what kind of animal it is. So that's important to also note as well. This is basically going to give you the breakdown of all of the fees. Now, if there was an association deposit and if there was a pet deposit, we would need to add that amount to the money due before occupancy section right here. It wouldn't be $58.50. It would be $58.50 plus any other additional fees, whether that be a cleaning fee, because there are cleaning fees sometimes, $120, $150, $200, whatever it may be. You want to make sure that all of these fees are outlined here. Okay. Now, here in this section, it says the paragraph 2 deposit will be credited as follows. You want to put that it's going to be credited as the first month's rent. Okay. This is the section that you want to clear up. You could say that it was going to be credited. The first month deposit is essentially what's going to be placed in escrow, what's going to be given to the title company, or the first month deposit. Okay. So you can either count that as the security deposit. You can count that as the first month's rent, the last month's rent. It's just standard to just have it as the first month's rent. Okay. Now, if we move on to paragraph 6, there's a section called rent payments, taxes, and charges. So this section has you list out the total amount that the tenant will be paying throughout the entire term of the lease. If it's a seasonal rental, then you're only going to multiply if it's a 6-month rental, for example, you would multiply the rental amount by the amount of months, and then that would give you the lease term total, right? In this case, since it's an annual lease, I took the rental rate, which is $19.50, and I multiplied that by 12, and then that gave me the $23,400. That's basically what the tenant is going to be paying throughout the entire year that he's going to be leasing at this property. Then all of these other stuff can be left blank. If there is a seasonal tax, for example, and it just doesn't happen to apply to this case, but if there was a seasonal rental, if this was a seasonal rental, for example, and there was taxes involved, because there are short-term taxes that some landlords need to pay, and they usually charge that to the tenant. If that's the case, you want to make sure that you also include the amount of taxes here, okay? Everything needs to be placed in the contract to lease, okay? In this case, it doesn't apply because it's an annual lease, but most majority of them, if they're 6 months and under, they do charge a seasonal tax or a short-term tax. So you want to make sure that you include any taxes that might be applied to that line right there. You also want to indicate how the rental will be paid. If the tenant wants to pay the entire year up in full, they want to give $23,400 on move-in day, that's fine. You would click the first box and you would click that it would be paid in full on the specified date, which would probably be move-in date, in the amount of, and then you would put the total amount that they would be paying. In this case, majority of the times, tenants are going to pay it month to month, or they're going to pay it on a monthly basis. So you would check off the second box that it's going to be paid monthly on I usually leave it blank and put the first of the month because that's usually the standard of what we do. There are certain cases where the tenant only wants to, or depending on when they move in, let's say they move in today, the 23rd, then the rent would be paid on every 23rd. But majority of rentals do want to keep it on the first. So when I send the offer, I keep it on the first, I just leave it blank. If you or your client want another date, then you would put that date on there when sending the offer. And you would put that they would be paying it on that day, if the first day, if left blank, of each month in the amount of, and then here in the amount of, you would put the rental rate, which in this case, it is $19.50. Okay. Now we go to paragraph 7 and 8, and those sections are just for pets and smoking. You always want to put that smoking is prohibited. And for pets, depending on if your client has one, and depending on if that specific rental property allows pets or not. This particular property, as you guys can see here in the MLS, it says pets are not allowed. So it just so happens that my client doesn't have one. So I just put it's prohibited. Now, if my client just so happened to have an emotional support animal, then I would put permitted, and I would put as described. I would put the name, the breed, the race, whatever of the dog. If it's like, for example, a Yorkie Terrier, I would put 10-pound Yorkie Terrier, and then in parentheses, I would put that it's an emotional support animal. When sending the contract to lease and the offer, you want to make sure that you include all of that documentation in your offer, in your email, okay? Because of course, by law, they can't reject emotional support animals as long as they have proper documentation, okay? In this case, it doesn't apply, but if they were to have pets, if the rental were to say that pets are allowed, then you can put permitted. If your tenant happens to not have a pet, then you can just put permitted, but none as of now. But if they want to get one in the future, at least you put on there that it is permitted, because that is what the MLS stated, okay? Moving on to the second and final page, the rest of the pages are just signatures. Paragraph number 9 is the utility section, where you are going to describe or note whether any utilities are included with the property. So let's read it carefully though, because some people get confused and they put here what is not included, and that's not the case. If we read it, it says tenant will pay for all utility services during the lease term, connection charges, and deposits for activating existing utility connections to the property except for, so that except for essentially means that whatever is placed on the following line is what is included in the rent. Okay, so if water was included, I would put on here except for water. My tenant won't have to pay for water because it is included. So section 9 is telling us what they are not responsible for. Does that make sense? Because it's saying here that they're going to pay for all utility services except for whatever is included already in the rent. Majority of rentals include, not all of them, but some of them may include water. Some of them may include cable, basic cable with the HOA. So you want to put that on there. You want to put basic cable, trash removal, water, whatever is included, you want to put it on there. Unfortunately for my client, this one doesn't include anything. All utilities are separate. So I put not applicable, NA. Okay. Does anybody have any questions so far? Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. I don't think I've gotten anything in the chat. Okay, good. Okay, paragraph 10 is the maintenance. So this is just standard. I put this on every single one of my contracts to lease. It says landlord will be responsible for maintenance and repair of the property except for basic stuff like AC filters, light bulbs, smoke detector batteries, and any repairs under, I put 100. Sometimes you can put 150, 250. Sometimes on the MLS, the listing agent says that they will be responsible for $500. Anything below 500, they increase it sometimes. So with this particular fun fact, with this particular rental, that's something that actually ended up happening, where the listing agent said, we're going to accept your offer, but the landlord wants the tenant to be responsible for any repairs under 500. And I was like, I don't know about that. I don't think he'll like that, and I don't like it either. It's usually 150 to 250 because I was representing my tenant. We look out for the best interest of our tenants. So I told him I don't think he'll agree with that. I hadn't even spoken to him yet, but I didn't want him to have to do that because that's ridiculous. So then at least I've never seen it be that high. So I told the listing agent, I don't know. My client just so happens to be really well qualified. So I was able to negotiate that. And they were like, okay, we'll accept 250. And I was like, no problem. 250 sounds more reasonable. And we were able to make it go down to 250. And that's what was placed on the lease. Now, if we move forward to the association approval, if the community has an association, there are some properties that are like, for example, single family homes or duplexes, multifamilies, whatever, that don't have HOAs. If they don't have HOAs, then you just want to leave all of this blank. You're not going to put anything. This paragraph 11 is only applicable if the community has an HOA. So in this case, it does have an HOA. So I would put on here, where applicable, the lease will be contingent upon condominium or cooperative or homeowners association approval. And you're going to cross off tenant will pay a non-refundable application fee of, I thought it was 150, it was actually 250. I learned today. 250 and make application for association approval by said date. Normally I put next business day. I try to make sure that my clients get the HOA application submitted as soon as possible because HOAs can take up to 30 days per Florida law. So I like to make sure that they get that in ASAP. All right. If the application fee was different, then you would put whatever the application fee is, okay? Usually that is listed on the MLS. If you don't know, you can ask the listing agent, you can call the HOA, whatever the case, but usually they do list it on here. And here you see application fee 250. So that's where you would get that from, and that's where you would apply it, okay? Additional terms, you don't have to put anything on this section. Some people leave it blank, some people put NA, whatever the case. I like to be extra, and I just put unit to be professionally cleaned prior to tenant move-in date. So the landlord or the listing agent actually let me know when they accepted the offer. They were like, listen, we're gonna just clean it normally. It's not gonna be professional. And I was like, okay, that's fine, no problem. You don't have to put anything there. I like to put that as a little extra. I like to make sure that the property is clean for the day that my client moves in. Okay. If there are any additional terms that need to be added on there, well, that would be your section to put it. If there's any additional condition, if there's any additional term that's not already listed on the contract lease, you would want to make sure to put it there in that section. That's what that's for. Okay, now if we move on, 13 is just background / credit references check. That's nothing to sign it, nothing to place there. But if we go to 14, this is just a service member status. You just have to check off whether yes or no if your client or tenant is defined as a service member based on that Florida statute. And if they don't, then you just put no. If they do, then you would put yes. Okay. There's also a failure to perform clause. It says if tenant fails, there's nothing for you to do here, but it's good to know. If tenant fails to perform any of the promises of this contract, the deposit paid by tenant may be retained by or for the account of landlord as agreed upon, liquidated damages, consideration for the execution of this contract, and in full settlement of any claims, and the parties will be released from all obligations under this contract. If the landlord fails to perform any of the promises of this contract, tenant may elect to receive a refund of deposit paid without waiving any action for damages resulting from landlord's breach. Okay. Then in the following section, which is the last section, is where you would place your information. Usually transaction desk just automatically populates it for you with your brokerage name and your name here where it says tenant's agent name. And then here you would put landlord's agent name and landlord's brokerage name. Okay. And that's basically it. That is how you would fill out a contract to lease. Of course, the information that is placed on the contract to lease will vary based on the property, based on the client, based on multiple things, but this is how it's broken down. Everything that you need to know is on there. It's pretty self-explanatory, but this is just an example that you can use to go off of if you ever need an idea of how to fill one out and how to send an offer. Now, just to finalize, I will show you how I go ahead and send the offer. I like to submit my offers this way. So as you can see, I place in capital letters offer. I put the address of the property completely. And I like to do it like this. I like to say something along the lines of, "Good evening. I am presenting this offer on behalf of my client. He is currently employed with so and so, earning this much. He has great credit. This is his credit, and he's ready for move-in as soon as HOA approval is obtained." Okay. Please find attached this email to the following: his ID, most recent 3 months bank statements, contract to lease, his rent-free credit report, background eviction report check, all of these things. Please let me know if you need anything else, and we look forward to hearing from you. I like to give a little breakdown of everything that I'm including in my email, so that the listing agent, when they receive the offer, it'll be easier for them to review. And then you attach all of the documents that are needed, and then you hear back from the client or from the landlord, or the listing agent, letting you know whether they have accepted your client or not. Okay, that's usually what you need. These documents are exactly what you would need to send the offer. You send it via email, and the listing agent's information is right here on the MLS. If you guys have Matrix or some other MLS, it may look a little bit different, but essentially it is the same thing. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Does anybody have any questions? Nope, we're good. Okie dokie. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope that this was helpful for you guys. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I hope you guys have fun with your families, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much. Bye.
Merry Christmas.